Hi everyone, and welcome to our channel, Hollow Testament. This is our very first video, and we're excited to have you here. On this channel, we share original, chilling horror stories designed to keep you up at night or help you fall asleep to something a little darker. If you enjoy creepy stories, haunted whispers, and tales that were never meant to be told, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Now, get comfortable, turn the lights down low, and enjoy tonight's stories. Okay, so I booked this Airbnb a few years back for a solo writing retreat. I was on a deadline, needed quiet, and found this secluded cabin in the Poconos that looked perfect online. Cozy fireplace, huge windows overlooking the woods, complete isolation, exactly what I needed to bang out a manuscript. What could go wrong, right? The drive up was scenic, but as I got closer, the roads got narrower and bumpier. By the time I reached the cabin, it was already dusk, and the place looked a lot more rundown in person than it did in the photos. Peeling paint, overgrown weeds, that kind of thing. But hey, I thought, it's just a place to sleep and write. I can handle a little rustic charm. The host, a guy named Mark, had sent me a key code, so I let myself in. The inside was musty, like hadn't been opened in a while musty, and colder than I expected considering the weather. I cranked up the thermostat and started unpacking, trying to ignore the general sense of unease that was settling in. That first night was pretty uneventful. I made some dinner, worked on my writing, and then crashed early, exhausted from the drive. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to this noise. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, like someone was hitting the side of the cabin with a muffled hammer. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding. I listened for a few minutes, trying to figure out what it was. Maybe a branch hitting the house in the wind, but the thumping was too regular, too deliberate. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and cautiously made my way to the living room window. I peered out into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. Just trees and shadows. The thumping continued, louder now, and I could feel it vibrating through the floorboards. I texted Mark, the host, explaining the noise and asking if he knew what it could be. No response. Great. I was officially alone and freaked out in the middle of nowhere. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that I was stressed about the deadline and hearing things. But the thumping wouldn't stop. It went on for hours until the sun finally started to rise. And as soon as the first rays of light hit the cabin, the thumping stopped abruptly. Just silence. I didn't get much writing done that day. I was too on edge, constantly listening for the noise to start again. I explored the cabin, hoping to find some clue as to what could have caused it, but there was nothing. Just the musty smell and the creepy silence. That night, I went to bed armed with a flashlight and a kitchen knife. I didn't want to admit I was scared, but I was definitely scared. And sure enough, around 3 a.m., the thumping started again. This time, I was determined to find out what it was. I grabbed the knife and the flashlight and crept outside. The air was cold and damp, and the woods were eerily silent. I followed the sound of the thumping, which seemed to be coming from the back of the cabin. As I rounded the corner, I saw it. Nailed to one of the cabin's support beams was a deer's head, fresh, and someone was standing there in the dark, rhythmically hitting it with a hammer. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing, and their face was hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. They didn't seem to notice me. They just kept hammering over and over again, the sound echoing through the silent woods. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found my voice. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking. The figure stopped hammering and slowly turned to face me. Even in the dim light, I could see that their eyes were wide and vacant. They didn't say anything. They just stared at me, the hammer still clutched in their hand. I took a step back, my heart racing. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. They just raised the hammer slightly, as if considering whether or not to use it. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to the cabin. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and then barricaded it with a chair. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I just sat there, huddled in the corner, listening for any sign that the figure was coming after me. The next morning, I packed my bags and got the hell out of there. I didn't even bother contacting Mark, the host. I just left the key on the table and drove away, not looking back. I reported the incident to Airbnb, but they didn't seem to take it very seriously. They offered me a refund and a vague apology, but that was it. I never found out who the figure was or why they were hammering a deer's head to the cabin. And honestly, I don't want to know. I've stayed in Airbnbs since then, but I'm always a little bit on edge. I do a lot more research before booking, read every review carefully, and always make sure to let someone know where I'm going. I wish someone had warned me that sometimes the promise of a secluded getaway can turn into a real life horror movie. You think you're escaping the world, but you might just be walking into something far more terrifying than you could ever imagine. You never know what is waiting for you, and never risk what you don't have to. Don't be afraid to call and verify the property you will be staying at, and make sure you are always safe. Story number 2. The chime of the Lyft app still makes my stomach clench, even years later. It's a Pavlovian response to pure, unadulterated fear, the kind that claws at your insides and leaves you gasping for air. Before that night, Lyft was just a convenient way to get home after a few too many at happy hour. Now, it's a trigger, a stark reminder of how close I came to disappearing. It was a Friday, late September, and the city was buzzing with that electric energy that always precedes a weekend. I'd met up with some friends at a bar downtown, and after a few rounds of margaritas, I decided to head home. I pulled out my phone, ordered a Lyft, and waited on the corner, humming along to the music spilling out from the bar. The app pinged, announcing my driver, Omar, arriving in 3 minutes. The car was a silver sedan, nothing out of the ordinary. When it pulled up, I glanced at the license plate, confirmed it matched the app, and hopped in. Omar was middle-aged with a trimmed beard and kind eyes. He greeted me politely, asked how my night was, and started driving. Normal stuff. We made small talk for the first few minutes. He asked about my job, complimented my dress, the usual pleasantries, but then something shifted. He took a detour, veering off the main road and onto a dimly lit side street. I frowned, but chalked it up to him trying to avoid traffic. Taking a different route? I asked, trying to sound casual. Yeah, he replied, his voice suddenly flat. Just a little shortcut. The shortcut led us further and further away from the city lights, into a maze of dark residential streets. The houses grew further apart, the trees casting long, ominous shadows across the road. A knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. This wasn't a shortcut. This was intentional. Are you sure this is the right way? I asked, my voice wavering slightly. He didn't answer. He just kept driving, his grip tightening on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the engine. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with fear. I tried to open the Lyft app to track the ride, but the screen went blank. No service. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp. I was trapped, alone in a car with a stranger who was taking me further and further away from safety. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about jumping out of the car, but we were moving too fast. I thought about screaming, but there was no one around to hear me. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity, winding through a network of deserted roads. Finally, he pulled over on a desolate stretch of highway, the only light coming from the moon hanging high in the sky. He turned off the engine, plunging us into absolute darkness. "Where are we?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He turned to me, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. The kindness was gone, replaced by something cold and predatory. "We're where you need to be," he said, his voice low and menacing. My blood ran cold. I knew, with sickening certainty, that this was it. This was how it ended. I was going to become another statistic, another missing person, another unsolved case. He reached across the console and grabbed my wrist, his grip like a vice. I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that echoed into the night. I struggled against him, kicking and clawing, but he was too strong. He pulled me closer, his face inches from mine. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Please don't do this." He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a chilling emptiness. He started to lean in, and I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. But then, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing closer and closer. Omar froze, his grip loosening on my wrist. He cursed under his breath and quickly started the car. "Not tonight," he muttered. "Not tonight." He sped off, leaving me trembling and breathless in the passenger seat. He drove in silence for the next hour, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. I didn't dare speak, didn't dare move. I just sat there, paralyzed with fear, praying for it to end. Finally, he pulled up to my apartment building. "Get out," he snarled, his voice laced with venom. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled out of the car, my legs shaky beneath me, and ran towards the entrance. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I was safely inside my apartment, locking the door behind me. I collapsed against the door, sobbing uncontrollably. I was alive, but I was broken. The innocence I'd had before that night was gone, replaced by a deep-seated fear that would never truly leave me. I reported the incident to Lyft and the police, but they couldn't do much. The police tried, but without solid evidence, it was my word against his. Lyft gave me a refund and a canned apology. I deleted the app, vowing never to use it again. The trauma of that night has stayed with me, shaping my life in ways I never could have imagined. I have trouble trusting people, especially men. I avoid going out alone at night. I jump at every unexpected sound. I'm hyper-aware of my surroundings, constantly scanning for danger. Sleep is a battle. Nightmares plague me, replaying the events of that night over and over again. I see his face in the dark, hear his voice in my head. I wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a drum. Therapy has helped, but it hasn't erased the memories. It's taught me coping mechanisms, but it hasn't taken away the fear. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever fully recover. That night stole something from me, something precious and irreplaceable. It shattered my sense of safety and left me living in a constant state of anxiety. I didn't realize the danger I was in until it was almost too late, and that realization will haunt me for the rest of my life. Story number 3. If I hadn't trusted my instincts that day, my little brother Mikey might not be alive, or worse. It was summer, scorching hot, the kind where the air itself feels heavy and suffocating. Mikey was 8, all skinny limbs and boundless energy. I was 16, stuck in that awkward in-between phase of wanting to be grown up but still craving the carefree days of childhood. Mom worked double shifts at the hospital, so I was in charge of Mikey most days. We lived in a small, quiet cul-de-sac. Safe, or so I thought. Mikey loved superheroes. He had a whole box of action figures, and every afternoon, our backyard transformed into a battleground between good and evil. That day, he was Spider-Man, naturally. I was reluctantly drafted as his sidekick, relegated to the role of damsel in distress, mostly because it involved less running around in the sweltering heat. We were in the middle of a particularly dramatic rescue scene when I first noticed him. A man, standing across the street near the edge of the woods that bordered our neighborhood. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. He wasn't even looking at us directly. He was staring intensely at Mikey. At first, I dismissed it, just some neighbor taking a shortcut through the woods. People did it all the time, but something about his demeanor felt off. He was tall and lanky, dressed in jeans and a long-sleeved shirt even though it was brutally hot. His face was obscured by a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't move. He just stood there, silent and still. I nudged Mikey, interrupting his heroic monologue. "Hey, Mikey, see that guy over there?" Mikey glanced in his direction, then shrugged. "Yeah? What about him?" "He's just staring. Doesn't that feel weird to you?" Mikey, oblivious as only an 8-year-old can be, just rolled his eyes. "He's probably just watching us play. Maybe he thinks I'm a cool Spider-Man." I forced a smile, trying to reassure myself that Mikey was right. But the knot in my stomach tightened. I trusted my instincts and they were screaming at me. "Okay, superhero, new mission. We need to go inside for some ice cream. Big bad villain weakened me." I faked a dramatic cough, hoping Mikey would buy it. He perked up immediately. "Ice cream? Awesome!" As we walked towards the house, I kept glancing back. The man was still there, still watching. My pace quickened. Once we were inside, I locked the door, even though it felt excessive. I peeked through the curtains. He was gone. "See? I told you he was just watching," Mikey said, already halfway through a bowl of cookies and cream. I tried to play it cool, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I called Mom, but she was swamped at the hospital and told me not to worry, that I was probably just being paranoid. "Lock the doors, and I'll be home as soon as I can," she said, her voice tired. After I hung up, I couldn't relax. I kept checking the windows, jumping at every little noise. Mikey, oblivious to my anxiety, was engrossed in a video game. Then I heard it, a faint tapping at the back door. My blood ran cold. I motioned for Mikey to turn off the game and come closer. He looked at me, confused. "What's wrong?" "Shh," I whispered. "Just stay here." I grabbed the kitchen knife, my hand trembling. Slowly, cautiously, I crept towards the back door. The tapping came again, louder this time. I peeked through the peephole. It was him, the man from across the street. He was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't make out what it was. His face was still obscured by the hat. He tapped again, then leaned closer to the door. His voice, muffled but clear, sent a shiver down my spine. "Mikey, I know you're in there, Spider-Man. I have something for you." I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. He knew Mikey's name. He'd been watching us. He wasn't just a harmless neighbor. "Mikey, go hide in my closet, now!" I shoved him towards my room, ignoring his protests. He ran, fear finally registering on his face. I locked my bedroom door behind him. I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? "There's a man outside my house. He's stalking my little brother. He knows his name. He's at the back door." My voice cracked with fear. I gave them my address, my hands still shaking like crazy. "Please hurry." As I was talking to the operator, I heard a loud crash from the back of the house. He'd broken the window. I screamed, then ran to my bedroom, barricading the door with a dresser. Mikey was huddled in the corner of the closet, sobbing. "It's okay, Mikey. It's going to be okay," I whispered, trying to reassure him, even though I was terrified myself. The door rattled as he tried to force it open. He was getting closer. Then, sirens. Loud, blaring sirens. The rattling stopped. I heard him run. I waited frozen till the police arrived, bursting into the house, guns drawn. They found him a few blocks away, hiding in the woods. He had a Spider-Man action figure in his pocket and a photo of Mikey taken from across the street. It turned out he had a history of stalking young boys. He'd been watching Mikey for weeks, learning his routine, waiting for an opportunity. The police determined he had an elaborate plan to kidnap my little brother. Mikey was traumatized. He had nightmares for months, afraid to go outside, clinging to me like a lifeline. It took a long time for him to feel safe again. I, too, struggled with the aftermath. The guilt, the fear, the constant replay of what could have happened. I couldn't shake the image of his face, the way he stared at Mikey, the chilling sound of his voice. But I also knew that I had saved my brother's life. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I hadn't acted quickly, things could have ended very differently. That day changed us both forever. It taught me the importance of trusting my gut, of protecting those I love, and of never underestimating the darkness that can lurk in the most ordinary places. We never took that quite cul-de-sac as safe after this. That place was our own hell. Story number 4. Okay, so looking back, yeah, the red flags were practically waving like a damn parade, but when you're in it, especially when you're young and stupid, you tend to ignore them, right? This was my first real relationship after high school. Her name was Sarah, and she was intense. That's the nicest way to put it. We met at a party. I was immediately drawn to her. She was beautiful, sure, but it was more than that. She had this confidence, this energy that just sucked you in. She seemed so much more mature and worldly than anyone else I knew. I was a goner from the second she looked at me. The first few weeks were amazing. We spent every waking moment together. It felt like we were in our own little world, shut off from everyone else. That should have been red flag number 1. Isolation. She didn't seem to like my friends, and she was always subtly suggesting that we spend less time with them. "They don't really get you, do they?" she'd say, or "We have so much more fun together. Why waste time with them?" I brushed it off. I was so infatuated that I didn't want to rock the boat. I started seeing my friends less and less. It wasn't a conscious decision, it just kind of happened. Then came the jealousy. It started small, a slightly passive-aggressive comment if I talked to another girl. "Oh, she seems nice," she'd say, with a tone that clearly meant the opposite. But it quickly escalated. She started going through my phone when I was in the shower. She'd question me for hours about every interaction I had with a female, no matter how innocent. Red flag number 2, glaringly obvious now, but at the time I chalked it up to her being really into me. I know. Stupid. The real turning point was the fight we had over my ex, Emily. Emily and I had broken up amicably a year before, and we were still friendly. We'd occasionally text each other memes or congratulate each other on accomplishments. It was nothing serious, just two people being decent to each other. Sarah found a text from Emily congratulating me on a promotion I'd gotten at work. She went ballistic. She accused me of still being in love with Emily, of lying to her, of betraying her. It was the most intense argument I'd ever been in. She was screaming, crying, throwing things. It was terrifying. I tried to explain that Emily was just a friend, that there was nothing going on, but she wouldn't listen. She demanded that I block Emily on all social media and never speak to her again. And idiot that I was, I did it. I wanted to keep the peace. I wanted her to stop being angry. That's when the control really ramped up. She started dictating what I could wear, who I could talk to, where I could go. She'd constantly check up on me, calling and texting multiple times an hour. If I didn't answer immediately, she'd accuse me of ignoring her or being with someone else. I was walking on eggshells constantly, terrified of doing anything that might upset her. I felt like I was losing myself, disappearing into her vortex of insecurity and control. My friends noticed, of course. They tried to talk to me, to tell me that I wasn't acting like myself. But I was so brainwashed, so afraid of Sarah's reaction, that I pushed them away. One night, I was at a work event. Sarah had insisted on coming with me, even though I told her it was just going to be boring business talk. She spent the entire evening glaring at anyone who dared to speak to me. At one point, I excused myself to go to the bathroom. When I came back, she was gone. I found her outside, sitting in my car, sobbing. She accused me of flirting with one of my coworkers, even though I hadn't even spoken to her. She said I was trying to humiliate her in front of everyone. I tried to calm her down, but it was no use. She started hitting me. Not hard, but enough to sting. She slapped me across the face and started scratching at my arms. I finally managed to pull away and get back inside. That was it. That was the breaking point. I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't live like that. Constantly afraid, constantly controlled. I went back outside, helped her into the car, and drove us home. The entire ride was silent, filled with tension. When we got back to my apartment, I told her it was over. She didn't take it well. She screamed, she cried, she begged me to change my mind. She promised she would change, that she would be better. But I stood my ground. I was done. The next few weeks were hell. She wouldn't leave me alone. She called and texted incessantly, sometimes hundreds of times a day. She showed up at my work, at my apartment, even at my parents' house. She threatened to hurt herself, to hurt me, to hurt anyone I cared about. I had to get a restraining order. Even then, she violated it multiple times. Eventually, she moved away. I don't know where she went, and honestly, I don't want to know. It took me a long time to recover from that relationship. I had to go to therapy to deal with the emotional trauma. I lost a lot of friends, but I learned a valuable lesson. Never ignore the red flags. No matter how infatuated you are, no matter how much you want to believe in someone, if they're showing signs of being controlling, jealous, or manipulative, run. Just run. Your sanity, your safety, and your life might depend on it. It was my Tinder horror story I didn't even know I was going to experience. Story number 5. All right, so buckle up, because this one still gives me the shivers. I've been trucking for close to 20 years, seen my fair share of weird stuff out on the road, but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, compares to what happened on that run through Nevada. It was a late October, heading east on I-80, hauling a load of, I can't even remember now, doesn't matter. What matters is the weather. It was a nasty storm brewing, the kind that makes your teeth ache. Wind was howling, and the rain was coming down in sheets. Visibility was crap. I'm a seasoned driver, so I wasn't overly worried, but I was definitely on edge. I slowed down, put on my hazards, and just focused on keeping the rig between the lines. Around mile marker 85, I started noticing something in my mirrors. A single set of headlights, way back, but keeping pace. Not unusual, plenty of trucks out on that stretch. But this one, it felt different. It wasn't overtaking, wasn't dropping back, just a steady, relentless pair of lights in the distance. I figured it was just another trucker being cautious in the bad weather. Still, I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. I tried tuning into the radio. anything to distract me, but the signal kept cutting out, just static and the occasional garbled voice. The only constant was those damn headlights in my mirrors. As the storm worsened, the road became almost empty. Most of the other trucks had pulled over, waiting it out. But this one kept following like a shadow. By this point, I was starting to sweat. My hands were gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. Then I saw it. A sign for a rest stop, maybe 5 miles ahead. I decided to pull in, hoping to get some coffee and maybe shake this weird feeling. Plus, if this other truck was just a coincidence, it would become pretty clear if they pulled in right after me. I signaled, slowed down, and pulled into the rest stop. It was deserted. Just a few empty parking spaces, a closed-up building, and that eerie silence you only get in the middle of nowhere during a storm. I parked, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute, listening to the rain battering against the cab. I took a deep breath and climbed out, grabbing my flashlight. I wanted to stretch my legs and see if I could find a working vending machine, maybe grab a lukewarm coffee. As I walked around the side of my rig, I saw the headlights. The other truck had pulled in, parking a ways down from me, facing the opposite direction. And it was hard to make out in the rain, but it looked like an older model, maybe a Freightliner or a Peterbilt, nothing fancy. What struck me was that it wasn't running. No engine noise, no exhaust, just sitting there, dark and silent. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to walk over there, see who was driving, ask them what the hell their deal was. But something told me to stay put. I decided to just get back in my cab and wait for the storm to pass. I climbed back into my truck, locked the doors, and tried to calm my nerves. I kept glancing in my mirrors, watching the other truck. Nothing. No movement. No lights. Just a dark shape in the distance. Hours passed. The storm raged on. I dozed off a couple of times, waking up with a jolt, always checking the mirrors. The other truck was still there. Finally, around dawn, the rain started to ease up. The wind died down, and the sky began to lighten. I decided to get going. I started my engine, checked my mirrors one last time, and pulled out of the rest stop. As I drove past the other truck, I slowed down, trying to get a better look. The cab was dark, the windows were tinted, but I could see something inside. A figure, slumped over the steering wheel. I almost stopped, almost went over there to check on them, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Scrawled across the back of the trailer in what looked like dried blood were 3 words, "Are we there?" I didn't stick around to investigate. I floored it, putting as much distance as possible between me and that truck. I didn't stop until I reached the next truck stop, miles away. I reported what I saw to the authorities, but when they went back to the rest stop, the truck was gone. To this day, I have no idea what I saw out there that night. Was it a ghost truck, a prank, or something far more sinister? I don't know, and I don't want to know. But I'll tell you what, I avoid that stretch of I-80 like the plague, and every time I see headlights in my mirrors at night, I get that same feeling in the pit of my stomach, that feeling of being watched, of something lurking just behind me, waiting for the right moment. And I know deep down that some roads are better left untraveled. Story number 6. Okay, so this happened to me a few months ago, and honestly, I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, replaying it all in my head. I've always loved to travel, backpacking through Europe, solo trips to Southeast Asia, road trips across the states. I thrived on the independence, the spontaneity, the feeling of being completely untethered. But after what happened, I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at a plane ticket or a dusty road the same way again. It started with a deal, a ridiculously good deal on a 2-week all-inclusive resort in the Dominican Republic. Like, suspiciously good. I'd been working nonstop, buried under deadlines and stress, and I desperately needed a break. So I ignored the little voice in the back of my head screaming, "Too good to be true," and booked it. The flight was uneventful. I landed in Punta Cana, the air thick and humid, a welcome change from the chilly gray I'd left behind. The resort was exactly as advertised, pristine beaches, turquoise water, endless cocktails. For the first few days, I was in paradise. I swam, sunbathed, read trashy novels, and basically just let all the tension melt away. I even made a few friends, a couple from Canada on their honeymoon and a group of college kids on spring break. We'd hang out by the pool, share stories, and laugh until our sides hurt. But then things started to feel off. It began subtly, a lingering stare from one of the resort staff that made my skin crawl, a whispered comment in Spanish that I couldn't quite understand, a feeling of being watched, even when I was alone on the beach. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, the product of too much sun and rum. One evening, I was walking back to my room after dinner when I noticed a small, unmarked road leading away from the resort, disappearing into the dense jungle. Curiosity got the better of me. I knew I shouldn't, but I felt the urge to explore. I told myself I would just wander a short distance and turn back, just to get a glimpse of the real Dominican Republic, away from the tourist bubble. The road was rough and uneven, littered with potholes and overgrown with vegetation. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The further I walked, the more isolated I felt. The sounds of the resort faded behind me, replaced by the chirping of insects and the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. After about half an hour, I came to a small village. It was nothing like the manicured beauty of the resort. The houses were dilapidated shacks, the streets were dusty and unpaved, and the people looked weary and worn. There was an unsettling stillness to the place, like everyone was holding their breath. As I walked through the village, people stared at me, not with curiosity or friendliness, but with a cold, unnerving intensity that made me want to turn and run. A group of men gathered on a street corner, their eyes following me with predatory interest. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw her. A young girl, no older than 10, standing alone in front of one of the shacks. She was dressed in rags, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes were piercingly bright. She stared at me with an expression that was both haunting and knowing. As I passed her, she reached out and grabbed my hand. Her touch was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into my skin. She didn't say a word, but her eyes seemed to be pleading with me, warning me. I pulled my hand away, shaken to the core. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, but I was too afraid. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back on the main road, gasping for breath. Back at the resort, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it all, that the village, the stairs, the girl, it was all just a product of my overactive imagination. But the feeling of unease lingered, amplified by the girl's terrified stare, which I just couldn't shake. The next day, I tried to put it behind me. I spent the day by the pool, drinking cocktails and chatting with my new friends, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I saw someone staring at me, a waiter, a security guard, a fellow tourist. Their eyes were cold and assessing, making me feel like I was being sized up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing, replaying the events of the previous day. The scratching at the door was relentless and wouldn't stop no matter how much I tried to tune it out. Finally, around 3 a.m., I gave up. I got out of bed and went for a walk on the beach. The beach was deserted, bathed in the pale glow of the moon. The waves crashed against the shore, creating a soothing rhythm that usually calmed me. But tonight, it just amplified my sense of isolation. As I walked, I noticed a group of people gathered around a bonfire in the distance. They were chanting and dancing, their movements frenzied and primal. The scene was both mesmerizing and terrifying. It felt like I had stumbled upon some ancient ritual, something that was not meant for my eyes. I started to back away slowly, wanting to escape unnoticed, but then one of the figures turned and looked at me. It was one of the men from the village, the ones who had stared at me with such predatory interest. He smiled, a chilling, toothy grin that sent a shiver down my spine. He gestured for me to come closer. I didn't move. I knew that if I went near them, something terrible would happen. He started walking towards me, his eyes never leaving mine. The other figures followed him, their chanting growing louder and more intense. I turned and ran, sprinting along the beach as fast as I could. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps pounding on the sand, their voices rising in a crescendo of madness. I ran until I reached the resort, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I burst into the lobby, gasping for breath, and begged the security guard to help me. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. He said there was no one on the beach, that I must have been dreaming. I tried to explain what I had seen, but he didn't believe me. He said I was probably just drunk and should go back to my room. I knew I couldn't stay there. I couldn't trust anyone. I was on my own. I packed my bags, paid for another taxi, and left the resort at dawn. I told the taxi driver to take me to the nearest airport. I didn't care where I was going, I just wanted to get away. During the drive, I noticed the driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were cold and calculating, just like the eyes of the men in the village. He started asking me questions about where I had been, what I had seen. His voice was low and menacing. I realized that I had made a mistake. I had traded one danger for another. I was trapped in a car with a man who might be even more dangerous than the people I had left behind. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I pretended to be talking to someone, telling them where I was and what was happening. I hoped that it would deter the driver from doing anything. It seemed to work. He stopped asking questions and focused on driving, but I could still feel his eyes on me, watching me, waiting for an opportunity. When we reached the airport, I practically leaped out of the car. I paid him quickly and ran inside, not stopping until I reached the security checkpoint. I sat in the airport for hours, shaking and terrified, waiting for my flight to board. I didn't relax until the plane finally took off and I was safely in the air, heading back home. But even now, months later, I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I still see their faces in my dreams, their eyes burning into my soul. The girl, the men, the taxi driver. I tried to report it to the authorities, but they dismissed it as a bad experience. They said there was no evidence of any crime. I know what I saw, I know what happened, and I know that I will never be the same. The sense of security and freedom that I used to feel when traveling is gone, replaced by a constant sense of dread and paranoia. I'm afraid to go anywhere new, afraid of what I might find. I've lost my sense of adventure, my sense of wonder. All that's left is fear. That dream vacation turned into a living nightmare, and the memory of that trip haunts me every day. Sometimes I wonder if I really escaped, or if a part of me is still trapped there in that village surrounded by those eyes. The truth is, I went looking for a story, and I found one. It's just not the kind of story anyone would ever want to tell. A few things remain, and still gives me chills when I think about them. The image of the girl in the village whose eyes were screaming at me to run. The feeling that I was being watched was something I'd explain, and that I can't shake even months after this happened. The chanting on the beach that seemed primal and insane. Those images will forever be burnt into my mind, and I'll never travel the same again. The feeling of being alone has never felt so real. I can't help but question if I really escaped. I feel so alone and lost every time I replay these moments. Story number 7. Okay, so I've always been pretty laid back, easygoing, maybe too much so. I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, which, in hindsight, was a huge mistake when it came to my sophomore year roommate, Sarah. Looking back, the red flags were practically waving in my face from day one, but I was too busy trying to be nice, trying to be understanding. I should have trusted my gut. College housing was a lottery system, and I didn't have any friends going into that year, so I was just assigned a random roommate. Sarah seemed nice enough in her initial emails. She was from a different state, majoring in something obscure like art history, and said she was super excited about living together. We coordinated who was bringing what, and everything seemed normal. The day we moved in, though, was the first hint that something was off. I arrived first, unpacked, and started setting up my side of the room. Sarah showed up hours later with way more stuff than she had mentioned in her emails, like boxes overflowing with art supplies, weird taxidermied animals, and stacks of books about occult stuff. I remember thinking it was a little strange, but I figured everyone had their quirks. She barely acknowledged me when she arrived, just mumbled a hey and started hauling her stuff in. That was red flag number 1, I guess. I tried to make conversation, asking her about her summer and her drive, but she just gave me short, monosyllabic answers. I brushed it off, thinking she was just tired from the trip. But as the days went by, her behavior got weirder. She was nocturnal, staying up all night painting or doing something. I never really knew what she was up to. She'd blast music with no headphones, and the music was always unsettling, droning stuff that made my teeth itch. I'd try to sleep, but the bass would vibrate through the walls. When I asked her to turn it down, she'd just glare at me and say, I need to concentrate. The room started to smell weird, too, like incense mixed with something metallic and rotten. I tried opening the windows, but she'd always close them, saying she needed the darkness for her work. And then there were the rituals. I started noticing strange symbols drawn on her side of the room, on the walls, on her desk, even on the floor. They looked like something out of a horror movie, and they made me deeply uncomfortable. One night, I woke up to find her standing over my bed, staring at me. The room was dark, but I could see her face in the moonlight. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, and she had this creepy, vacant expression on her face. I gasped and sat up, and she just blinked slowly and said, You were talking in your sleep. Then she turned around and went back to her side of the room. I couldn't fall back asleep after that. I felt like I was being, watched constantly. I started avoiding the room as much as possible, spending my days in the library or with my friends, but eventually I had to go back. One day I came back from class and found the room completely trashed. Her art supplies were scattered everywhere. The taxidermied animals were torn apart, and the walls were covered in those creepy symbols. And in the middle of it all, Sarah was sitting on her bed, rocking back and forth and chanting something I couldn't understand. I was terrified. I backed out of the room slowly and ran to the RA. When we came back with campus security, Sarah was gone. Just gone. Her stuff was still there, but she was nowhere to be found. The police were called and they investigated, but they never found her. It was like she vanished into thin air. The university moved me to a different room, and I tried to put the whole thing behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. A few weeks later, I got a package in the mail. It was a small wooden box, and it had my name written on it in Sarah's handwriting. I hesitated to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, there was a single object, a small, crudely made doll that looked disturbingly like me. Its eyes were sewn shut, and it was covered in pins. I screamed and threw the box across the room. I called the police again, but they said there was nothing they could do. There was no evidence of a crime, and Sarah was still missing. To this day, I don't know what happened to her or what she was doing in that room, but I know that I should have trusted my gut from the beginning. I should have listened to the warning signs and gotten out of there before things escalated. Now, I always trust my instincts, no matter how small or insignificant they may seem, because sometimes those small instincts can save you from a living nightmare. I still have that doll. It sits in a box in my closet, a constant reminder of the time I ignored my intuition and almost paid the price. I learned a hard lesson. Listen to that little voice, people. It might just save your life. Story. Number 8. I never thought I'd be sharing this story. Honestly, for a long time, I tried to bury it, chalk it up to stress and sleep deprivation, but it keeps resurfacing, especially when I'm drifting off to sleep and I know I need to get it out. It started innocently enough. I was a sophomore in college, struggling to afford off-campus housing. My previous roommate had moved out unexpectedly, leaving me scrambling to find someone new. That's when I met Sarah. She seemed normal at first glance, quiet, a little shy, but friendly enough. She was a senior, studying art history, and desperately needed a place to stay after a falling out with her parents. We met at a coffee shop near campus and chatted for a couple of hours. She seemed responsible, had good references, and most importantly, was willing to split the rent. I figured, what could go wrong? We signed the lease a few days later, and she moved in the following week. Initially, things were fine. We kept to ourselves mostly. I was busy with classes and work, and she spent most of her time in her room, supposedly painting. But then, the weirdness started creeping in. It began with small things. I'd come home to find my belongings moved, not drastically, but subtly rearranged. A book slightly out of place on the shelf, a picture frame turned at a different angle. I initially brushed it off as me being forgetful, but it happened more and more frequently. Then there were the noises at night, creaking floorboards, whispers, and shuffling sounds coming from her room. I'm a light sleeper, so it kept me up. I tried to talk to her about it, but she always denied hearing anything. She'd just give me this blank stare and say, maybe it's just the old building. But it felt like more than that. It felt intentional. One evening, I came home from work and found a strange symbol painted on my bedroom door. It looked like some kind of occult sigil, a series of interconnected lines and circles. I was freaked out. I immediately confronted Sarah about it. She claimed she had no idea what it was and suggested that maybe someone had broken into the apartment. But the way she said it, so nonchalant, so devoid of concern, didn't feel genuine. I tried to scrub the symbol off, but it wouldn't budge. It was like the paint had been burned into the wood. I started feeling increasingly uneasy in my own home. I felt like I was being watched, constantly scrutinized. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was somehow involved in all of this. I began noticing other strange things about her. She never seemed to leave the apartment, not even for groceries or classes. She always wore the same clothes, long, flowing dresses that covered her from neck to ankle. And she always kept her hair pulled back in a tight bun, revealing a high forehead and piercing blue eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I did a little digging and found her social media. It was creepy. Her pages were full of weird paintings and strange art. It was like she was obsessed with the occult and that all kinds of things were involved, and everything was always related to demons. One night, I woke up to a strange smell in the air, like burning incense and something else, something metallic and acrid. I got out of bed and followed the scent to Sarah's room. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint light emanated from within. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I pushed the door open. What I saw inside will forever be burned into my memory. Sarah was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by candles, chanting in a language I didn't understand. In front of her was a makeshift altar, covered in strange objects, bones, feathers, dried herbs, and in the center of the altar was a photograph of me, a photograph that had been taken from my bedroom wall. I stood there frozen, unable to move or speak. Sarah stopped chanting and slowly turned to face me. Her eyes were glowing with an unnatural light, and a sinister smile spread across her face. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice a low, guttural growl that didn't sound like her own. I finally snapped out of my paralysis and ran. I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the street. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station. I told them everything that had happened, but they were skeptical. They said they couldn't do anything without evidence. They agreed to send an officer to the apartment to check things out, but when they arrived, Sarah was gone. Her room was empty, the altar was gone, and there was no trace of her ever having been there. The police chalked it up to me being stressed and suggested that maybe I had imagined it all, but I knew what I had seen. I knew that Sarah was not who she seemed to be. I broke the lease and moved back in with my parents. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. To this day, I still have nightmares about her, about the chanting, the glowing eyes, the sinister smile, and I still wonder who she was, what she wanted, and why she chose me. I'll never understand what was happening. I just know that my time with Sarah was the most terrifying experience of my life, and it's a story I never thought I'd be sharing. But I needed to get it out, to exorcise the demons that still haunt my dreams. I never want to encounter someone like her again. Story number 9. Looking back, I know I ignored a million red flags. I needed a place to live and fast. My lease was up, my savings were dwindling, and the pressure was on. So when I saw the ad for a room in a shared house near campus, I jumped at it. The rent was ridiculously low for the area, and the house looked decent enough in the pictures. The ad mentioned 2 current roommates, both male, and said they were looking for someone chill and easygoing. Perfect, right? I contacted them immediately and scheduled a viewing. When I arrived at the house, it was definitely lived in. Dishes piled in the sink, clothes strewn across the furniture, a general air of disarray. But hey, I'm not the tidiest person myself, so I didn't judge too harshly. The 2 roommates, Mark and David, seemed friendly enough. Mark was tall and lanky with a mop of curly hair, and David was shorter and stockier with a perpetual smirk on his face. They gave me a quick tour of the house, showing me my room, small but functional, and the shared spaces. They told me about their jobs. Mark worked part-time at a bookstore. David was between opportunities, their hobbies, video games mostly, and their general lifestyle, late nights, loud music, occasional parties. Honestly, my gut was screaming at me from the moment I walked in. Something about their energy felt off, a weird mix of apathy and intensity that made me deeply uncomfortable. But I ignored it. I focused on the low rent, the convenient location, the desperate need to find a place. It'll be fine, I told myself. Just deal with it for a few months until you find something better. Huge mistake. The first few weeks were okay. Mark and David mostly kept to themselves, spending their days locked in their rooms playing video games. I'd see them occasionally in the kitchen or living room, but our interactions were minimal. They weren't rude or hostile, just distant. But as time went on, things started to get weird. The noise levels increased dramatically. They'd blast music and shout at their games until all hours of the night, making it impossible to sleep. When I politely asked them to keep it down, they'd either ignore me completely or give me a sarcastic, sure, whatever, before turning the volume right back up. Then there were the smells, a constant, lingering odor of stale beer, greasy food, and something else I couldn't quite place, something vaguely rotten. I started cleaning the common areas myself, scrubbing the counters, taking out the trash, trying to make the house livable again. But it was a losing battle. No matter how hard I tried, the mess and the stench always returned, worse than before. And then there were the things. I started finding strange objects around the house. A collection of creepy dolls with missing limbs and vacant eyes. A jar filled with teeth. I still don't know if they were real. Strange symbols drawn on the walls with what looked like charcoal. Each new discovery made my skin crawl a little more. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were into some weird art thing. Maybe they were just messing with me. But deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong. One night, I woke up to a strange sound coming from the living room. It was a low, rhythmic chanting, almost like a prayer. I cautiously crept out of my room and peeked around the corner. Mark and David were sitting on the floor, surrounded by candles and those creepy dolls, their eyes closed, their bodies swaying back and forth. They were chanting in a language I didn't recognize, their voices growing louder and more frenzied. I didn't stick around to find out what they were doing. I quietly retreated back to my room, locked the door, and huddled under the covers, shaking with fear. After that night, I knew I had to get out. I started looking for a new place immediately, but finding something affordable on short notice was proving difficult. In the meantime, the situation at the house continued to deteriorate. Mark and David became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. They stopped going outside, ordering all their food and supplies online. They covered the windows with black garbage bags, turning the house into a dark, suffocating tomb. They started leaving me notes, cryptic, threatening messages filled with misspelled words and bizarre symbols. I started carrying pepper spray with me everywhere I went. One evening, I came home from work to find my room ransacked. My belongings were scattered across the floor, my clothes ripped, my personal items defaced. Scrawled across the wall in red paint were the words, "Leave." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag with my essentials and fled the house. I didn't even bother grabbing the rest of my stuff. I just needed to get away. I spent the next few nights sleeping on a friend's couch, terrified to go back to the house. Eventually, I contacted the police, but they said there was little they could do without concrete evidence of a crime. I was stuck. I couldn't afford to lose my deposit, but I couldn't bring myself to return to that house. Finally, I decided to cut my losses and move on. I found a new place, a small but safe apartment in a different part of town. I left everything else behind, my furniture, my clothes, my books, everything. It was a fresh start, a chance to put the nightmare behind me. It's been years since then, but I still think about Mark and David sometimes. I wonder what happened to them, what they were really up to in that house. I'll never know for sure, but one thing I do know is this: I'll never ignore my gut again. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust your instincts, even if you can't explain why. It could save your life. Story number 10. Okay, listen up, because I'm about to share something that still makes my skin crawl, and it's all thanks to Craigslist. I'm not talking about a slightly shady furniture deal or a weird roommate situation. This was full-blown, life-altering, creepy, and I want to warn anyone else even thinking about using Craigslist for, well, anything after this. It started innocently enough. I was looking for a cheap car. My old beater finally gave up the ghost, and I needed something reliable to get to my new job. I scoured the usual sites, but everything was either overpriced or obviously a lemon. Then I stumbled upon a Craigslist ad that seemed almost too good to be true. A late model sedan, low mileage, clean title, selling for way below market value. The ad was short and to the point, with just a few grainy pictures and a contact email, no phone number listed. I emailed the seller asking for more details and if I could come see the car. I got a response back almost immediately. The seller, who identified themselves as Jay, said they were selling the car because they were moving overseas and needed to get rid of it fast. They were willing to meet me the next day at a gas station on the outskirts of town. Now, alarm bells should have been ringing already. Low price, quick sale, no phone number, meeting in a remote location, but I was blinded by the prospect of getting a good deal. I ignored my gut and agreed to the meeting. The next day, I drove out to the gas station. It was one of those old, rundown places with only a couple of pumps and a dingy convenience store. I got there a little early and parked, waiting for Jay to show up. After about 15 minutes, a dark-colored SUV pulled up next to me. A man got out. He was tall and muscular, with a shaved head and sunglasses. He looked like he belonged in a movie about Russian mobsters, not selling a used car on Craigslist. He approached me and introduced himself as Jay. I immediately felt uneasy. He didn't smile, didn't make eye contact, just stared at me with this intense, unnerving gaze. He told me the car was parked around back and asked if I wanted to take a look. I hesitated. Something felt seriously wrong, but I had driven all the way out there, and the car was supposedly a steal. So, against my better judgment, I followed him around the back of the gas station. That's when things took a turn for the worse. The car was there, all right, but it was in much worse condition than the pictures had shown. The paint was scratched, the tires were worn, and the interior smelled like mildew. I tried to play it cool, but I was already feeling incredibly uncomfortable. "So," I said, trying to sound casual, "can I take it for a spin?" Jay just chuckled. "Not necessary," he said. "The price is firm. Take it or leave it." His tone was menacing, and I realized I was in a bad situation. I was alone in a remote location with a guy who looked like he could snap me in half. I knew I had to get out of there. "Actually," I said, "I think I'm going to pass. It's not really what I'm looking for." Jay's expression hardened. "You wasted my time," he said, his voice low and threatening. He stepped closer to me, and I could see a glint of metal in his hand. It was a knife. Panic surged through me. I knew I had to run. I turned and sprinted back toward the gas station, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Jay yelling behind me, but I didn't look back. I ran into the convenience store, gasping for breath, and told the cashier to call the police. Jay didn't follow me inside. I watched through the window as he got back into his SUV and sped away. The police arrived a few minutes later. I gave them a description of Jay and his vehicle, but they never caught him. They said it was likely a scam, maybe even something worse. They warned me to be careful about meeting strangers from Craigslist and to always trust my gut. I learned my lesson the hard way. I got lucky that day. I could have ended up seriously hurt or worse. I'm sharing this story because I want to warn others about the dangers of Craigslist. Don't be blinded by the promise of a good deal. Trust your instincts. And never, ever meet a stranger in a remote location alone. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Get out of there and call the police. It's better to be safe than sorry. I'm still shaken up by what happened, and I hope my story can help someone else avoid a similar experience. Be careful out there, and don't trust everything you see on Craigslist. It's not worth the risk. There are definitely better ways to get a car. Story number 10. Okay, I'll try to get this out without completely losing it. Even typing this is making my hands shake. This happened about 5 years ago, and I honestly haven't been the same since. It's the kind of thing you see in a movie, not something that actually happens to normal people. But it happened to me, and it started with a Craigslist ad. I was looking for a new apartment. My lease was up, and I needed to find a place fast. I was scrolling through Craigslist like you do, trying to find something decent and affordable. And that's when I saw it. It was a room for rent in a house, not an apartment. The ad was pretty basic, said it was a quiet, clean house, shared common areas, utilities included. What caught my eye was the price. It was ridiculously cheap, like half of what other similar rooms were going for. Too good to be true, right? That should have been my first warning, but I was desperate, remember? I emailed the poster, a guy named Mark. He replied almost immediately and said I could come see the place that evening. He gave me the address, which was in a part of town I wasn't super familiar with, a bit more run down than where I was currently living. I drove over that evening, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. The house was, well, it was a house. A little weathered, paint peeling, but not terrible. Mark answered the door, and he seemed normal enough. Mid-30s, kind of quiet, a little awkward. He showed me the room, which was small but clean. He explained the shared bathroom and kitchen situation. Everything seemed fine, almost disappointingly normal. We talked for a bit, and he asked me about myself, my job, my hobbies. He seemed genuinely interested, and I started to relax a little. I even started thinking, okay, maybe I lucked out. Maybe this is a good deal after all. I agreed to take the room. He said he needed a deposit and the first month's rent up front, which was standard. I wrote him a check, and he gave me a key. I told him I'd move my stuff in over the next few days. That's when things started to get weird. The next day, I went back to the house to start moving some of my belongings. Mark wasn't there, which I thought was a little strange, but I figured he was at work. I started unloading boxes and carrying them into my room. As I was going back and forth, I noticed a door down the hall that I hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar, and I could hear a faint humming sound coming from inside. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open a little wider and peeked inside. It was a basement. A dark, unfinished basement. The humming sound was louder now, and I could smell something metallic and rotten. I couldn't see much, just shadows and clutter. I told myself it was probably nothing, just an old storage space. But something felt off, really off. I tried to shake it off and went back to moving my stuff, but I couldn't stop thinking about that basement. The humming, the smell, the way the door had been slightly open. It was nagging at me, making me uneasy. That evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was in that basement. I waited until it was late, after I assumed Mark would be asleep. Then I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the hall to the basement door. I opened it slowly and quietly, trying not to make a sound. The humming was even louder now, and the smell was almost unbearable. I shined the flashlight down the stairs and took a deep breath. What I saw down there, I will never ever forget. The basement was filled with things, old furniture, broken appliances, piles of junk, but that wasn't what caught my eye. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single bare bulb, was a table. And on that table was a person, a woman. She was tied to the table, naked and gagged. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she was desperately trying to move, but she was completely restrained. The humming sound was coming from a machine next to the table, some kind of generator, maybe? I don't know. I stood there, frozen in shock, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there was Mark. He was holding a knife, and his face was different. Gone was the quiet, awkward guy from the day before. This was someone else entirely. His eyes were cold and empty, and he had a twisted smile on his face. He didn't say a word. He just lunged at me. I screamed and dropped the flashlight. Everything happened so fast. I managed to dodge the knife, but he grabbed me and started dragging me towards the basement stairs. I fought him with everything I had, kicking and screaming. Somehow, I managed to break free. I ran. I ran out of the house, out into the street, screaming for help. I didn't stop running until I reached a gas station a few blocks away. I called the police, hysterically telling them what I had seen. They arrived quickly and went to the house. They found Mark, and they found the woman in the basement. She was alive, barely. She had been missing for weeks. Mark was arrested and charged with kidnapping, assault, and a whole list of other crimes. He's in prison now, hopefully for the rest of his life. But the worst part is they found other things in that basement. Things I don't even want to describe. Evidence that Mark had been doing this for a long time. Other women. He had been using Craigslist to lure them to his house. I had almost been one of them. I still have nightmares. I still see Mark's face, that twisted smile. I can still smell that basement, hear the woman's muffled cries. I haven't used Craigslist since. I don't think I ever will. The thought of what almost happened It's too much. I'm sharing this because I want people to be careful. Be so careful. You never know who's behind that anonymous ad, that seemingly innocent email. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. That cheap room on Craigslist almost cost me my life. I can barely bring myself to talk about this, but maybe, just maybe, sharing my story will help someone else avoid the same fate. Be safe out there. Story number 11. All right, so listen up because this actually happened to me and it still creeps me out to this day. It's about Craigslist, naturally, and how a good deal turned into something I still lose sleep over. Back in 2010, I was living in a tiny apartment, barely scraping by. My laptop, a beat up old thing, finally gave out and I needed a new one. Stat. I worked online, so no laptop meant no income. Problem was, I was broke. Like ramen for dinner every night broke. Craigslist, as always, was my first stop. I scoured the computers section hoping for a miracle. And then I saw it. MacBook Pro, like new, $400. Now, even back then, a MacBook Pro for $400 was insane. Way too good to be true. But the pictures looked legit, and the description said it was barely used. Owner upgrading to a newer model. My gut screamed scam, but my wallet screamed louder. I emailed the seller, a guy named Mark, and he responded almost immediately. He was friendly, said he needed the money quick to pay rent, and was willing to meet up that evening. Alarm bells were ringing, but I ignored them. Desperation, you know? We agreed to meet in a public place, a busy coffee shop downtown. I figured, broad daylight, lots of people around, what could go wrong? I withdrew the cash, basically my entire savings, and headed over, trying to convince myself I wasn't about to get robbed. Mark was already there when I arrived. He was a young guy, maybe late 20s, kind of scruffy looking, but not overtly threatening. He had the laptop with him in what looked like pristine condition. I took it, checked it out. Screen was perfect, keyboard responsive, everything seemed to be in order. Too good to be true was starting to feel true. We chatted for a few minutes, just small talk. He seemed normal enough, maybe a little nervous, but I chalked it up to him needing the money. I handed him the cash. He counted it quickly, and then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd. I sat down at a table, fired up the laptop, and started to relax. Maybe I had actually scored a killer deal. I connected to the Wi-Fi, and that's when things started to get weird. The laptop was running incredibly slow, like glacially slow. I tried to open Safari, and it took a solid 5 minutes. Then a pop-up appeared. This computer is being remotely accessed. My blood ran cold. I tried to close the pop-up, but it wouldn't go away. Then another message. Don't try to stop me. I'm watching you. Panic set in. I slammed the laptop shut, ripped out the battery, and ran out of the coffee shop like a crazy person. I felt like everyone was staring at me, like Mark was watching from somewhere, laughing. I went straight to the police. They took my statement, but honestly, they didn't seem too concerned. They said it was probably just some elaborate prank, and there wasn't much they could do since I had willingly handed over the money. Dejected and terrified, I went back to my apartment. I didn't turn the laptop back on. I just stashed it in a closet, convinced it was some kind of cursed object. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. For weeks, I was paranoid. I kept the blinds closed, jumped at every sound, and barely slept. I was convinced Mark was going to show up at my door. I even considered moving. Eventually, the fear subsided, but I never forgot the experience. A few months later, I finally mustered the courage to take the laptop to a computer repair shop. The guy there looked at it and shook his head. "This thing is a mess," he said, full of spyware, keyloggers, remote access software. Someone was definitely using it to spy on you. He wiped the hard drive, reinstalled the operating system, and assured me it was safe to use. But even after that, I couldn't shake the feeling of being violated. I sold it for parts and never looked back. To this day, I'm extremely wary of Craigslist. I still use it, but I'm much more cautious. I always meet in very public places, bring a friend, and thoroughly inspect anything I'm buying. That MacBook Pro cost me more than just $400. It cost me my peace of mind. And it's a reminder that sometimes the best deals are the ones you walk away from, because some things just aren't worth the risk. And the worst part, I could have just got some help. If you made it this far, thank you, truly. Not everyone can sit with the darkness this long, but perhaps you were meant to. If these stories left a mark, consider subscribing and return next time for more whispers from the void. Until then, sleep well, if you can.